Hi guys and welcome to the channel. My name's Alex and I run Prime Miniatures where I sculpt 3D printable models. Like many people, I love painting miniatures and have for many years. Recently there's been a trend in mini painting to get back to some traditional methods involving oil paints. I gave it a try earlier this year and wanted to share with you about how it went and what I learned, specifically about painting a visually interesting black armour for my Stormcast Eternals. The first step was, of course, to prime the models and then to undercoat in black. Now, a key component I found in making interesting black is to ensure that there are other tones in there. In this case, what I did was I mixed dioxazine purple in with the lamp black to create my black colour. And my choice of paint range for this was the Winsor & Newton Winton oil paints. And while they're not full artist quality, they do have enough pigmentation for what I want to do, and they have a very reasonable price. For the white, I simply used a classic titanium white. So on top of the matte black base coat, I put down a thin layer of the black purple colour. All of my paints are thin to a comfortable consistency, roughly the same as I'd want to use when painting with acrylic. By thinning with white spirits, the drying time is sped up a little bit, but there's still plenty of time to do my work. On top of this, I started value sketching in the highlights of the model. I'm not particularly good at volumetric highlights, and I've never really done non-metallic metal before. But by simply following a procedure of putting highlights on any parts which were perpendicular to the light source, and shadows parallel to it, I'm relatively happy with the effect. Now, this is where the magic of oil paints happen. Using a second and completely dry brush, I work the shadows and highlights together, primarily by drawing my brush back and forth across the line in a swishing motion. If I draw my brush in a motion perpendicular to the border, I found it blends too much and too quickly and turns the whole thing into a mess. Because we're working on top of a black base coat, and there's a black wet layer down first, the black overpowers the white. Not least because I'm terrible and I overwork the blends too much as well. And that leads us on to the next step of the work, repetition. We simply re-emphasize the highlights where we want to place them, and then come back in with a blending brush again to soften those blends. Now, I ended up having to do this quite a few times back and forth, so it's worth taking a moment here to talk about brushes and general oil work. Because oil paints are immiscible in water, we need to use white spirits to clean our brushes, as well as in moderation to thin where it's necessary. White spirits are not good for you, so make sure to do all of this in a safe and ventilated environment, and that goes as well for oil paints in general, although I wasn't using any particularly toxic ones here. In general, these paints are quite dangerous if ingested. In terms of the brushes that I used, oil paints with their thick pigmentation can often destroy good brushes. Many expert painters that I follow, they recommend using synthetic brushes, cheap and disposable ones. But personally, I really hate synthetic brushes with a passion though. So instead, I'm using cheap £2 sable brushes that I got off of eBay. Overall, I'm expecting them to maybe last until the end of the Dominion set, or my half of the Dominion set, if I'm lucky. And I use a size 0 for application and a size 1 for blending. The size 0 is washed in a few milliliters of white spirits whenever I need to change colour, and then it's thoroughly dried before ever touching paint again. The blending brush is only ever washed between painting sessions, or whenever it's picked up just too much paint that I can't simply remove by pinching it with a piece of kitchen towel or toilet paper. If you ever try and blend with a blending brush that's still wet with white spirits, then it's going to end up very badly, as it will strip off a lot of the paint we've put down. Now, back to the model. With the base of the blend finished, we just have to deepen those shadows. Due to my general inexperience with oils and a fear of messing up, I decided to glaze the shadows in instead. To avoid any unintended effects, I let my oil layer dry for 48 hours before doing this, and I chose to use Games Workshop Contrast Paint Black Templar by thinning with thinner to create a nice stable glaze. and I simply work that around in the shadowed areas, especially in the recesses, to deepen those shadows. I personally love glazing as a technique for creating shadows, as it's almost foolproof. The shadows are generally worked on wide sections or in recesses where more liquid paint readily pools. Once the glaze was fully dry, it was time for the final step, which was highlighting again. Here we bounce back to oils, and by using a little bit more thinner than we used before, we create some titanium white paint, and we just use it to dot out the very top highlights and maybe apply some edge highlights where appropriate. A very light pass with the blending brush, and there we are. The black armour is finished. I hope that this semi-tutorial has been useful for you. I really enjoyed my time working with oils, and I'm already considering where I could next make use of them in a project. If you like this content and want to see more, then consider subscribing or leaving a like down below. Next time I'll be talking about and showing my method for painting gloom spike kits.